were the students. Those are my peers, and back in the 70s, back in like 77, I guess, grade 8. And I didn't know it at the time, but this girl right here, she would later become my wife. This is from her yearbook, and you notice over here, next to this guy's name, she wrote, Foxy. That wasn't me. No, this was me, and nobody called me Foxy, go figure. You know, I hated middle school. It was a horrible time. I was bullied, and I didn't like it, and my grades were bad. It was awful. And back then, I mean, there wasn't much you could escape to. We didn't have video games, I mean, except for Pong. And that's it. You know, no social media, no cable TV, nothing. All we had is like the outside and books, and I hated the outside. And I didn't really like reading either, but that's what I got into. And so I started to read. The best series I read that I remember reading for myself was The Lord of the Rings. And I found out that there was this one English teacher in my middle school that had done her thesis on The Lord of the Rings. And I thought, well, she's got to be pretty cool then. So I asked if I could get into her English class. Her name was Mrs. Pabst. And to get into that class, you had to sort of prove you were like a brainiac. So one day I was sitting in regular English, and my teacher decided to test me out. I mean, I was usually just in the back not saying anything. She called on me cold one day. She said, Rick, could you explain to the class what irony is? And I totally froze. I was like, irony is the fact that I can't think of the definition of irony right now. She accepted the answer, and I got into honors English. Mrs. Pabst was awesome. She got me immediately. She understood where I was coming from. She said, you like comic books? You like The Lord of the Rings? Did you know that that's all from Norse mythology? And I said, well, what do you mean? And so she started sending me books about the Norse gods, like Odin, like Loki, like Thor. And I really got into those stories. I started writing my own stories. The first one I wrote, I still remember it. It was called Appointment with an Archangel. It's about this guy who dies and goes to heaven, and he has this conversation with an angel. Mrs. Pabst read it. She said, this is great. Why don't you try to send it off to see if you can get it published? So I did. I sent it off. I was so excited. Back then, of course, no email. Everything went by the post. So I put it in, and I just waited, went to the mailbox every day. Finally, I got my answer after waiting for months. There is my first rejection note. Yeah, dated 1978. It's typed on carbon paper. It's so old. And the guy says, Dear Richard, first of all, let's get it straight. There's no such thing as being too young to write. If you can tell a story, submit it, good for you. He says, this really isn't what we need. We don't really publish stories like this, but it's really good. Keep trying. My mom was so proud of this rejection. She put it in a frame, and she hung it in the house. And I had to look at it every time I walked in the living room. True story. When I was in college, my house burned to the ground. Everything was destroyed. Except this. They pulled the rejection note out of the fire, not a mark on it. My mom put it back in a frame, and it's still hanging in the house. Rejection is a powerful thing. Well, I went on to high school, and again, I was still pretty reluctant. I decided to grow my hair out. There's me. Yeah, how about that? Yeah. I started keeping a journal because writers were supposed to do that. I found it the other day. There's an entry from my journal when I was in freshman English, and there's a line in there that says, I'm really looking forward to getting freed. And I had forgotten about that, and I went, oh wow, I spaced that in Latin class back then. They had a Roman slave auction. And if you were a freshman in Latin, you had to go up on the auction block and get like people bidding on you. I know, right? You couldn't do that today. You know, you don't do that. But back then, I got sold as a slave, and I had to spend a whole 6 weeks as the senior's slave. Like, go get me lunch, slave. It was terrible. But anyway, that was my introduction into Roman culture. And I also started an underground newspaper in high school where I made fun of the losing football team. That was fun. I probably would not have gotten out of high school if it was not for one fact. I met a girl. That's Becky, who I showed you her yearbook earlier. We met in high school. We've been together ever since. We're coming up on 30 years this summer. If you wonder where Percy came from, yeah, I'm kind of that guy. I'm just kind of a goof. You know, I don't really do well in school. I probably would have gotten kicked out, except for Becky. She kind of, kept me on the straight and narrow and helped me out. And so that was the good part of high school. We went on to college together, and I know you're probably thinking, could your hair get any longer? Yes? I had this idea that the writing, since I was not, doing anything there and all the submissions were getting rejected, I would just write music instead. So I found out pretty quick that I am not Apollo. I cannot write music. The good part about college, two good things happened. One is that Becky and I got married. We got married on our mutual birthday. We're both married. We're both born on June 5th. She's 30 minutes older than I am. So we got married on the same day, so I can never forget my anniversary. It's very convenient. The other good thing is I decided to become a teacher, and so I got a teaching job, and I had to cut my hair. I taught middle school for about 15 years. I really loved it. There's a picture of me in my classroom. And we did all kinds of fun activities. I tried to always make it interesting. I didn't want the kids to be bored, because I am easily bored myself. I was a reluctant reader. I don't like to be bored in class, so I didn't want my kids to be bored either. When we did Korea, we had a big Taekwondo unit. So we got the kids out there breaking boards and stuff. It was cool. When we did Shakespeare, we took fencing for stage. So we got like foils and they were like fencing each other. That got a little dicey there. 8th graders with swords. And yes, when we did Greek mythology, we got the barbecue pit out and we wrote like messages to the gods and we made like burnt sacrifices on the barbecue pit. Really hip school in San Francisco that we did this, but still, I was kind of surprised they let me do that. By the way, if you want to sacrifice to Aphrodite, burning Barbie dolls smell really bad. Now, as I was teaching, I was telling stories. And my kids would always say, you should really write some of these down. But I didn't really know what to do for stories for kids. I did, for some reason, while I was teaching middle school, however, have this desire to contemplate murder. I don't know what that was about. But I decided to try writing a murder mystery. I decided to set it in my hometown of San Antonio. And that is my first brainstorming map. The real thing is about the size of the door. It's huge. And every square is a chapter. And that helped me keep things organized as I was writing my book. People often ask me, how do you deal with writer's block? That's how. I make a roadmap so I know where I'm going. A lot of people, and I did this too, when you start, you get halfway through and you're like, I don't know what to do now. I'm bored. And so you start something else. You gotta map it out and then just do it all the way through. And then you can go back and revise all you want. A roadmap really helps. But I really didn't have any idea what I was doing. I mean, that's the manuscript for my first novel. I printed the whole thing out. Anybody want to guess how many pages that is? What does that look like? Yeah. About 500? Any other guesses? Yeah. 305? You guys are really close. It's about 375. Yeah. And if you look inside, you will see that every page is covered in correction marks, where my editor has told me what I have to change. Anybody want to guess how many times I had to rewrite my first manuscript before they finally decided it was good enough to be published? What do you think? About 20? Okay. What do you think? 48? Okay. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah.
77.
77, all right. Fortunately, not that many times. Only 14 drafts. And I know you're thinking, wow, I don't like doing a second draft in my essays, right? Yeah, I didn't either. But the thing I found out is that's just part of writing. Nobody can ever write a perfect first draft. It cannot be done. You just have to go back and revise, and revise, and revise until you get it right. I'm still doing this every time I write a novel. Maybe not 14 drafts, but at least 3 or 4 on every single book I write. But finally it got published, and when it came out, that was the cover. Big Red Tequila! Everything in Texas is bigger, even murder. It did okay. It won a couple of awards. And I did a few more in the series because I was having fun with it. This is the book I wrote that was set in, you probably can guess, Austin. The Devil Went Down to Austin. This was fun because I had to take scuba diving lessons. I went down into the bottom of Lake Travis. Somebody told me this story. They said, did you know that Lake Travis used to be a river and then they built a dam? They flooded the entire valley. And in 120 feet of water at the bottom of the lake, there's a forest of sunken pecan trees. I said, really? So I went down there to check it out. It is the creepiest place you can imagine. So I wrote this about a killer who was hiding his victims in the trees at the bottom of the lake. Yeah, it's pretty dark, but it was fun though. Some of these even got published in other languages. There is my second book, The Widower's Two-Step, but can you tell what language it's written in? What does that look like to you? Yeah, Korean, you're close. How did I get? Japanese, there you go. And a lot of people look at this and they notice that it's the other way around, right? They read backwards, sort of to us. Inside, it's also interesting because in Japan, it's like the Matrix, right? They read in columns, up to down. I said that one time at a school in California. And this girl said, oh, so that's why. It's like, what? She said, I was on the plane with somebody one time and they were reading in Japanese and they kept going. So I'm glad I could clear that up for her. You know, and I tell stories, like I said, but you know, people would say, well, are you going to quit your day job? Okay, the thing about being a writer is it's always nice to have a backup job because most writers never get to do that full time. It's really hard to make money being a writer. Let me give you an example. How many books would you say the average American reads in a year? Anybody want to take a guess? How many books does the average American read in a year? What do you think? About 50? Okay, 50. What do you think? About 2 over here. Ah, pessimist, okay? Right here. 17. Okay. The average American actually reads 15 books in a year. So, I would guess probably most of you guys are already well above the average for most people in America. Now, different question. How many different titles, different books, not copies, but different books are released, published every year in the United States? Like Blood of Olympus is one. How many other books are out there? What do you think? About 5,000. What do you think? About 50? What do you think? About 20. The actual answer, how many different titles are published in the U.S. every year? 328,000. Yeah. So, if the average American's only reading 15, and we're putting out 328,000 every year, how many of those are going to be read? Not many. So it's really hard to get noticed. Now, how do you make money at publishing? Okay, the average price, like a hardcover, if you bought it tonight, probably roughly around $20. How much of that do you think the author gets? How much? Do I get the whole 20? Do I get a portion? What do you think? Yes, on the aisle. What do you think?
$5.
$1.
Out of $20, how much do you think that the author would get? About 15? Boy, that would be nice. No, the author gets about 10%. So if you buy a book, you know, of mine, and I'm not complaining, but if you buy a book of mine, and it's 20 bucks, I get 2 bucks. Well, where does the rest go? Well, it's divided. It's divided between the bookseller who sold it to you, and the publisher who printed it, and the wholesaler who sold it to the bookseller. There's a lot of other people that need to get it. So how many copies would you have to sell to get rich? A lot, right? That's the general answer. And so the average thing is, my advance, by the way, that's the money they give you up front. On my first novel was $15,000, which, hey, I wasn't complaining. That's great. But it's not like I was going to quit my day job and become a full-time writer on that. But that was fine with me. I really enjoyed teaching. I got dressed up a lot for different units that we would do. There's colonial Rick. There's samurai Rick. Elizabethan Rick. I told stories. Not everybody was impressed by that. I used to be the mystery reader for my son Patrick's class. You know, have you ever had those? Like, okay, we have a special guest today. They're going to read you a story, kids. And I did that so often for Patrick's class. And I went into the library and they said, okay, close your eyes, everybody. We have a special guest. And they'd all close their eyes, all these little second graders. Okay, open your eyes. Ta-da, it's Rick Riordan. One kid was like, I knew it was going to be him again.